In the news tonight, the Arab League and Egyptian Foreign Minister make a landmark visit to the occupied West Bank to push for an end to the Israeli occupation and arrange for an Arab minister's visit to Ramallah. The international mediator touting a peace plan for Syria warns of hell if all sides don't come to the negotiating table, while Moscow blames rebels for prolonging the war by refusing to talk with the government. And the U.S. president and congressional leaders agreed to make a final effort to prevent the country from going over the fiscal cliff as a New Year deadline looms. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Arab League Secretary General Nabil al-Arabi and Egyptian Foreign Minister Mohammed Kamel Amr met with Palestinian officials in Ramallah to discuss ways to ease the Palestinian financial crisis through Arab donations. Palestinians have been struggling to get Arab support to make up for $100 million in shortfalls left by Israeli sanctions following the UN approval of statehood. Arab countries agreed at a summit in Baghdad in March to provide Palestinians with a safety net of $100 million each month. But speaking at a joint news conference with Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki in Ramallah, al-Arabi said none of that has been achieved yet. Al-Arabi voiced the Palestinian state's need for material and political support, saying Palestine cannot move forward with its responsibilities under the ongoing shortage of material. Earlier in Amman, Foreign Minister Nasser Joudeh met with the Arab League chief and the Egyptian Foreign Minister. Discussions dealt with the latest on the Palestinian issue and efforts to revive Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. The two Arab officials were on their way to the West Bank to push for an end to Israeli occupation and arrange for a visit to Ramallah by Arab foreign ministers. It was Al-Arabi's first visit to Ramallah.
Our meeting with Jordan's foreign minister was very important. We discussed the core of the Palestinian problem and the reason why Resolution 242 has not been implemented since 1967 until this date. Where the Palestinians are concerned, the resolution was implemented, and the same applies for Egypt and Jordan, whereas for Syria, it was implemented by ending confrontations in 1974. Now, we have to work on ending the Israeli occupation.
Meanwhile, building materials were allowed into Gaza via the Rafah crossing for the first time since Hamas seized control of the enclave in 2007. The building materials allowed by Egypt are part of a shipment donated by Qatar, which has pledged $400 million to finance reconstruction in Gaza. 6 truckloads of building material crossed in, and more were expected in the course of the day. Palestinians said it was the first time anything other than people and medical supplies have been allowed in since 2006. A border official said while the Egyptian authorities agreed to allow the donated material into Gaza, the shipment did not mark the start of the full opening of the crossing yet. International mediator on Syria Lakhdar Brahimi warned of hell in Syria if the warring sides shun talks, while Moscow blamed the foes of President Bashar al-Assad for refusing to negotiate. Brahimi was speaking in Moscow following talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He said responsible people inside and outside Syria should help the Syrians stop their descent into more and more bloodshed and perhaps a failed state. Brahimi spent 5 days in Damascus this week as part of a major push to promote a peace plan that calls for a transitional government, without specifying President Bashar al-Assad's role. Khaled Babne has more.
UN Arab League mediator Lakhdar Brahimi said after talks in Moscow that he is still hopeful about a negotiated solution to the crisis. He warned that Syria faces hell if no deal is reached to end the 21-month bloodshed.
The only alternative is really hell or a political process. Then we have got all of us to work ceaselessly for a political process. It is difficult, it is very complicated, but there is no other choice except that that route if we really want to be a responsible international community and want to help the Syrians also be a little bit more responsible towards their country and people.
Russia also agrees there is still a chance for a negotiated solution, but Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov insists that removal of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad cannot be a precondition for a political solution. He described such demands as wrong and said the opposition's refusal to talk to the government creates a dead end.
I'd like today, by the means of this microphone, to call on the Syrian opposition to leave aside this factor that unites them, the demand of Assad leaving power, and instead to formulate a constructive agenda and write down on paper this vision which the opposition has for Syria's future.
Brahimi and Lavrov did not announce any major new initiatives after their meeting, which follows Brahimi's 5 days of talks in Syria. Lavrov noted that Assad has said publicly and privately that he would not step down, adding that Russia does not have the ability to change Assad's position. For his part, Brahimi continues to insist on implementing the Geneva Agreement as the core of a political process. However, he conceded there may be one or two little adjustments on the plan. Meanwhile, and despite intense diplomatic efforts to end the crisis, fighting continues in different parts of the country. Syrian government forces have pushed rebels from a district in Homs after several days of fierce fighting in the strategically important city. The army moved into Deir Balba, a neighborhood on the northeastern edge of Homs, leaving the rebels controlling just the central neighborhoods around the old city and the northern district of Al-Khalidiyah. Opposition activists also said Assad's forces have bombarded the provincial town of Karnaz in Hama, killing 10 people. Rebels have been gaining ground in the northern provinces of Aleppo and Idlib and launched an offensive in the central Hama province, which would extend their control south towards Homs and Damascus. Hala Dababne for the news at 10.
In Cairo, Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi voiced his country's support to the Syrian revolution, but said Bashar al-Assad's administration has no place in Syria's future. Morsi was speaking during a televised speech to Egypt's Shura Council. He said Egypt's priority is to halt the bloodshed and to work with Arab, regional and international states towards a political solution that would allow the Syrian people to replace the current regime with elected leaders. But he said this must take place while preserving the unity of Syria entirely. And during his speech to Egypt's upper house of parliament, Morsi pointed to what he called a new era for Egypt. Speaking about Egypt's troubled economy, Morsi said there are hopeful signs despite concerns over a downturn. He said despite the difficult circumstances and in spite of the immense challenges that the Egyptian economy is facing, the general indications for the social and economic situation of the country show some noticeable achievements in different areas. He said the disputed new constitution guarantees equality for all Egyptians.
Egypt as a state and society is now emerging into a new era in which there is no place for dictatorship or discrimination or the absence of social justice for all citizens on all social levels and of all beliefs and political positions. All are equal before the law and in this constitution.
And back here at home, the Anti-Corruption Commission Prosecutors General placed the assets of former board chairman of the Jordan Phosphates Company, Walid Al-Kurdi, under precautionary seizure over corruption charges and financial violations. Al-Kurdi is also accused of abusing his position to make unlawful investments in violation of the provisions of economic laws. The Anti-Corruption Board had in March referred the phosphate company's maritime shipping contracts to the Prosecutor General following suspicions of corrupt practice estimated at $40 million. And in August, other files were presented to the Anti-Corruption Board following illegal company product sales to the value of $300 million carried out between 2007 until this year. U.S. President Barack Obama urged Americans to come together around a plan to grow the U.S. economy and shrink the country's deficits. In his weekly radio address, Obama repeated a message he put forth yesterday hoping for a last-minute agreement to avoid the fiscal cliff after a meeting with congressional leaders. The White House meeting with congressional leaders aimed at averting the fiscal cliff had ended with some optimism. If no deal is reached, however, $600 billion in tax hikes and federal spending cuts will begin to take effect on Tuesday, January 1st.
We're now at the point where, in just a couple of days, the law says that every American's tax rates are going up. Every American's paycheck will get a lot smaller. And that would be the wrong thing to do for our economy. It would hurt middle-class families, and it would hurt the businesses that depend on your spending. But if an agreement isn't reached on time, then I'll urge the Senate to hold an up or down vote on a basic package that protects the middle class from an income tax hike, extends vital unemployment insurance for Americans looking for a job, and lays the groundwork for future progress on more economic growth and deficit reduction. I believe such a proposal could pass both houses with bipartisan majorities, as long as these leaders allow it to come to a vote.
A Russian airline is split into pieces after it slid off the runway and crashed onto a highway outside Moscow, killing 4 of 12 people on board. Police said 12 crew members were on board, but no passengers. The crash left smoking chunks of fuselage on the icy road. The crash during peak holiday travel cast a spotlight on Russia's poor air safety record, despite calls by the president to improve controls. The plane, a Tupolev Tu-204, was operated by the Russian airline Red Wings and traveling from the Czech Republic. An emergency services spokesman said 4 people died of injuries after the crash and 4 others were in hospital. A group of young musicians from a Paraguayan slum have come together to form an orchestra, but not any kind. These musicians play everything from Beethoven to Mozart to Frank Sinatra and the Beatles on instruments made entirely from trash. They include guitars made from cans, cellos from metal drums, and brass instruments made from galvanized piping. The orchestra of recycled instruments got its start 5 years ago when a teacher decided to teach kids living near a garbage dump in the slum how to play musical instruments. With not enough instruments to keep the kids busy and little money to buy any, he decided to recruit the help of residents who make a living picking through and recycling trash. And soon, the teacher and his students had their instruments all made from recycled materials. So far, the group has performed in 3 countries, and a documentary film is also being made about them.
Entonces, ellos están transformando no solamente sus vidas, sino
Two days left and we wrap up 2012. Satirical video creators Jib Jab have released their annual Year in Review video, a musical tribute to everything that caught our attention this year, from the Mayan apocalypse, the US presidential election, to Gangnam Style fever. Here's the Year Review in Jib Jab style.
Jib Jab!
It's the end of creation. The signs are every place. I smelt that record pace. A dude who jumped for face. We had a Libyan crisis. The fiscal cliff was near. It's 2012. The end is here. We had a hot Zumba madam. And 50 Shades of Grey. We all came out as gay. Stay out of Chick-fil-A. We had cheating and great guns. I blew my whole career. It's 2012. The end is here. I called that college girl a slut. A chick license. The boss has stood. We all got funky Gangnam Style. I fixed a masterpiece. We had lobby and hookers. Big scandals everywhere. We kept Obamacare. I argued with a chair. We had a heart bought a superstars.
We put an SUV on Mars.
In my new book, I bump and grind.
We sadly had to say goodbye.
We moved on up into the sky. We had Hurricane Sandy, replacement reps for all. We still can get along,
And Snooki's now alive.
but our troubles are over, 'cause it's our final year. It's no use pretending.
Apocalypse is trending.
2012, the end is here.
And we begin with tennis and the opening of the Hopman Cup Group B match in Perth, Australia, in which Spain beat South Africa 2-1. The tournament is made up of 8 teams and are split into 2 groups of 4, with each team playing the other 3 teams in their group. The 2 teams that finish top in their group play off in the finals. South Africa won the men's singles rubber after Kevin Anderson beat Fernando Verdasco. The heated match ended with Anderson winning 7-6, 6-4. But in the women's singles, Medina Garrigues leveled the tie for Spain with a 2-set win over Chanel Skippers. It seemed like an easy game for the Spaniard, who finished the match with a 6-4, 6-2 victory. And in the deciding mixed doubles rubber, Verdasco and Garrigues took the first set 6-4, but the South African pair secured the second after winning the tie-break 7-3. South Africa established a 5-2 lead in the match tiebreaker, but Spain fought back and clinched the win 10-8. Spain will next play France tomorrow, while South Africa will face the USA in the invitational team-based event. In basketball and the NBA, the Golden State Warriors ended their 4-game losing streak to the Philadelphia 76ers. Golden State forward David Lee led the Warriors with 25 points and 12 rebounds as his team held off a second-half charge to beat the 76ers 96-89. The Warriors now sit at 20-10, their best start since the 1991-1992 season. The Sixers have now lost 8 of 10 games on the road this season.
Back to David Lee. Tommy doesn't want to venture out there. David hits it again.
And finally, a quick look at the weather forecast. A cold and partly cloudy night with northwesterly light winds. Tomorrow it will be cold in the hilly areas and cool in the rest of the kingdom with northeasterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba can expect relatively cold night and a mild day tomorrow with northerly moderate to fresh winds and calm seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, his reminder of the day's top stories. The Arab League chief and Egyptian foreign minister make a landmark visit to the occupied West Bank to push for an end to the Israeli occupation and arrange for an Arab minister's visit to Ramallah. The international mediator touting a peace plan for Syria warns of hell if all sides don't come to the negotiating table, while Moscow blames rebels for prolonging the war by refusing to talk with the government. And the U.S. president and congressional leaders agreed to make a final effort to prevent the country from going over the fiscal cliff as a New Year deadline looms. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.